So, of course, at the moment, a lot of the current conversation when it comes to world trade has been very much focused on national policy. But as we know, global trade, it highly depends on actually that collaboration between governments and the private sector. So can you share with us an example of how the Alliance is actually supporting those sort of collaborations between private and public in terms of hopefully avoiding some of these sort of trade frictions or maybe strengthening the supply chain?
Thanks, Sam. Well, the Global Alliance for Trade Facilitation has now been around for 10 years. We're celebrating our 10th anniversary this year, and we are really dedicated to finding ways of removing obstacles to trade, mainly in developing countries, with an objective to generate economic growth. We operate about 35 different projects in about 30 different countries in different parts of the world. And really what we're trying to do is look at trade in a very practical way and working with governments and private sector, because we really believe that it is essential to bring these two groups together in order to be able to boost trade. So to give you one particular example is in Uganda, which has been trying to boost its exports of agricultural produce over the last number of years. And what we've been putting in place is a traceability system so that the export players at the airport have got visibility of produce coming in from the farms before they arrive for loading onto the aircraft. And we have developed this through an IT system developed locally. And this not only facilitates the process, provides visibility and enables better planning.
Excellent. Now, if we now shift into the European Union, of course, it's got a very influential trading bloc, and these are very different times that we're operating in. Can you tell us what sort of ways are you working with different members or partners when it comes to navigating this sort of new normal?
Let me first say that I forgive you. I do not want this to call the new normal already. I mean, I really hope that we are still in the absolutely abnormal and that we get back to the way it was, which means that we are focusing on in the future borderless and frictionless trade. While we see now exactly the opposite happening. Of course, the EU, the Commission, as the autonomous, let's say, is in charge of the trade policy of the European Union, including its member states. So, but having said that, it's not, of course, the European Commission alone that just decides on its own, but there are a lot of discussions ongoing with the member states to ensure that whatever measures are taken will not have a detrimental effect on the economies of the member states. So what is very important is what you see happening here from across the ocean is a breach with what we've been building since since the Second World War, but also since the beginning of the 90s with the establishment of the WTO, is a rules-based trade environment. And in the EU, we strongly believe that this is the best way forward.
Lars, if we look at the supply chain side, how are companies like Maersk supporting their customers navigate this increasingly fragmented trade environment?
No, thank you, Sam. And naturally, this is challenging times for international trade in that sense, with all the changes we've seen already. And then on top of that, the recent situation where actually tariffs and customs have come in the center of world news. And again, this is important strategic questions regardlessly. So what we always do is, of course, looking into the supply chain as an end-to-end type of pipeline that needs to be supported all through. And it's all about data, using data, quality data, verified data to actually be able to meet those new requirements that are there because of the situation we see. And I always say that trade is like water, it finds its way. But for us in Maersk, it's about finding waterways that are compliant and resilient. So we actually in various ways can help our clients to navigate this and maybe even change and challenge some of the problems that are there into opportunities, because we believe in that new challenges need new solutions.
I'll bring you back to you, Philippe, here. How is the alliance working with governments and the private sector to sort of streamline these sort of trade border processes? Could you have some examples what you're doing in the current climate?
Yes, of course. Well, first point to make is, trade is not going away. Even though we are all going through challenging times because of uncertainty, and the trade volumes might dip in the short term, they're not going to dip forever, and trade is going to continue. Lars mentioned that it's like water. I tend to say trade seeks the path of least resistance. And what we try and do is help trade go in whatever direction it needs to go. To answer your question, about half of our work is directly related to digitalization. I think, all believe there's a consensus that digitalization is the way forward, but it's not always an easy thing to implement because it requires the involvement of all stakeholders. And digitalization is not just about installing a computer and connecting a network. It requires a lot more. And so we spend a lot of time reviewing and streamlining processes on paper, and then adding the information technology to make it work, and orchestrate the process so that all the stakeholders can come on board in the most effective way. What we are able to do is measure in quantitative terms what is the reduction in time and costs as a result of digitalization. And we are talking, if you talk in terms of return on investment, in Morocco, for example, we've invested about $1 million, and the return on investment in terms of reduction in cost is about $40 million per annum. That's quite significant.
Yes.
And so what we try and do is multiply this, upscale this, so that we eventually get to a situation where we have a significant reduction in paper. Clearly, this is a challenge. Anybody in trade will recognize that there is still a lot of paper in the system, even in some of the most advanced countries in the world. But every little helps.
Absolutely. That's a great example. So, Martijn, can you share with us how is the EU supporting European businesses when it comes to managing that regulatory uncertainty in international trade?
There are several aspects to this. One of them I already mentioned. By supporting the international, let's say, through the WTO, the international trade rules and the rules-based system. Secondly, what we are trying to do, and one of the examples, for instance, to our support to the Global Alliance, we're one of the donors with the Global Alliance, to work with our partner countries to ensure that actually they will work on their predictability in actually their regulatory environment, to help take non-tariff barriers away, to help anything that could hamper a trade with the EU or trade in general. Secondly, what we also now are trying to do is, and that is quite a relatively new development over the past few years, is that we are shifting our development efforts with our partner countries way more from a originally, let's say, ground-based development relationship, way more in supporting investments. So what we're looking at is enabling large-scale investments into important development areas, like infrastructure, like the digital infrastructure, like renewable energy. But obviously that's impossible to do without the private sector.
Supply chains are now highly digital. How are the digital tools and data-driven solutions able to sort of help during this current climate?
No, absolutely. Data and data-driven solutions is the future that we know and we are building, and many do. There's still a lot of work to be done on it because, as Philippe said before, there are still a lot of paper documents in the trail, but we're seeing acceleration because of the changes in the world right now. And of course, we are very focused on that right now to actually be able and use and reuse data all through the supply chain together with our clients, right? So a couple of examples of how we actually do that. So one thing is supply chain visibility, to make sure that we have data that is verified, that we actually can use, that our clients can use in their interactions and so forth. Two other examples is, of course, using artificial intelligence supported different type of platforms and tools that we actually can look into, say, tariff uncertainties, engineering. We can look into rules of origin, which is a big issue specifically in today. And the third thing we are doing really much is looking into these new type of regulations that is coming, that is supply chain multi-tier type of regulation. That could be ESG. So we have a CBAM solution that is fully digital. We have working on an EUDR for deforestation solution with our clients, co-designing that. And what we have already in the market is a upstream transactional risk management screening for some of these regulations like UFLPA, the forced labor legislation in the US. The point with that is that the earlier we can do in the process, the easier it is to be trade compliant for our clients and ourselves. And we can also then exchange that data with customs administrations and other border agencies in beforehand, and that makes the process better. So in many ways, this is what we are trying to do and develop, and we call it a passport for goods over time. So what we want to do is collect a number of pieces of data, get them together and voluntarily exchange them with governments and government agencies on beforehand to be able and be more predictable and resilient all through the supply chain. And we are doing tests with that already in piloting, and we have operational solutions on this as well. So digitalization is accelerating under these circumstances, have been for some years.
If we now pivot to the future, and of course we're now in a climate with, there seems to be disruption after disruption, which is of course reducing that visibility and predictability. From the Alliance perspective, how do you see this then changing your approach to trade facilitation?
Well, you mentioned a very key word, and that is predictability. We are all evolving in an unpredictable world. And I think what is important here is how adaptable one can be. And I would say that the more adaptable you are, the more you're going to be able to thrive in this developing environment.
If we build on looking at the horizon and the future, when it comes to the European Union, how do you see those partnerships evolving in terms of the ways that you work with member states, but also other partners in their sector?
That's a very, very good question. There are different partnerships to be identified in the future that are very important. If I just keep it close to my heart, is particularly the partnership with our international partners, whether it's those that we work together with within the WTO and in other international fora, but particularly the partners that we support to remain part of the global trade environment. I think those are extremely important to assure that it's not only us in Europe and in the developed world that pick the fruits of global trade, but also that it will be also the developing countries that will enable to actually grow and grow jobs and grow the economy, and in the end alleviate the poverty that still remains out there to the largest extent. We can only do that in partnership with the countries, but we can only do that with the partnership with the private sector. Because it's very simple. If you want to create jobs are not usually created by the public sector. Yes, they are, but then they're publicly paid. But it really economically valuable jobs are created in the private sector.
That's a great way to sort of lead on to the final question, which is how are companies rethinking their supply chains for the future? Could you share some insights on that side?
I genuinely believe, and I think many of our clients and companies are looking into how can we get trust into this system, or maybe a new type of trust, because trust is really what trade is about and what needs to be to actually grow and develop. And trust is never given, it's earned. I think we need to rethink how we actually get that trust into the system again and between the different stakeholders of supply chains. And the way to do that is through trade compliance. Trade compliance is the new license to play. We need to make sure that we can document that we are low-risk companies that has a compliance system in place that is all through end-to-end in the journey. And to do so, I think what companies and ourselves as well, when looking at this, is really concentrating about. One is data, as I said before. It's about owning your own data. People would be surprised how many companies who actually not own their own customs and trade data. It's somewhere in the supply chain with various service providers and so forth. And that needs to be, we need to rethink that. You need to have access to it, or you need to have a trusted partner that actually manage this for you. Secondly, we need to look into various type of solutions that are multi-market and multi-risk and multi-compliance oriented. So again, not look at getting a system or getting a solution or getting an answer to a specific market or to a specific regulation by itself, but instead looking at how can we actually create platforms for that data to again get interconnectivity between business systems, government systems in various ways, and exchange in the data we need in as early as possible in the supply chain. And by doing that, we can create that trust that is there, but it's verified trust. It's not trust given to somebody, but somebody has proven with a compliance record, digital compliance record in various ways. That is where European Union is going with trust and check and UCC. That is where most of the bigger markets is going anyway, to just look at the volumes of trade that has come in long before we saw the distortions and the delays we see in international trade today. So it's really about creating and recreating that trust in the system by using data, verifying it, validating it, and getting that acknowledged by government agencies as well. If you are compliant, you should also be treated as compliant and low risk. If we can do that, it's really about trusting the truth. And that is what we should be doing. So I'm really optimistic that we can also look at this as a wake-up call, as a change process. And all three of us have been talking about that on this panel, right? What can we actually see that can drive the process in the direct direction we need to go? Because I think the direction is really clear here, but we own our own future. We can actually have an impact on how it's done. And we all have to contribute to that, because nobody can solve that on their own. It needs to be a partnership.
So is this climate, from what you're saying, basically accelerating what needed to be done anyway?
And I think that was started before we saw the climate itself. It's just, as you say, accelerating. And it's just, again, shown the value of doing these investments